So the packet was the intro to limiting reactant, limiting reagent. Reactant, reagent means the same thing. So let's talk about an analogy first. We want to make a batch of chocolate chip cookies. We go to Kroger and buy a 5-pound bag of flour, a 5-pound bag of sugar, and only 1 bag of chocolate chips. Now the recipe calls for, let's say, 2 cups of flour, 2 cups of sugar, and a full bag of chocolate chips. We can only make 1 batch of cookies, right? Because we'll run out of chocolate chips. We'll have more than enough flour. We'll have more than enough sugar. But we don't have enough chocolate chips to make more than 1 batch. So we're going to run out of chocolate chips and have the leftovers, flour and sugar. So if you think about that analogy with chemistry and stoichiometry, what you have with limiting reactant, let's say the chocolate chip cookies, the flour, and the sugar were all givens. Right? The chocolate chips, the flour, and the sugar were all givens. Well, in limiting reactant problems, the way that you can tell that it is a limiting reactant problem is that you have at least 2 givens. Okay? Just like the packet, right? We had 1 reaction. Part A was balanced, part B was 1 given, part C was another given, right? Well, in full-blown limiting reactant problems, you have 2 givens. Now, just like the packet where you treat the 2 givens separately, that's what you're doing on this worksheet. You're given 2 givens, but what you're going to do is treat each given as its own separate stoichiometry problem, calculate the grams of whatever product you're calculating, and then just like the packet where part D was choose your lowest amount, with limiting reactant, you're going to choose your lowest amount of product. Now, don't get that confused, right? You do your stoichiometry separately with your 2 givens. And a lot of times, limiting reactant problems is going to ask how much or what is the maximum amount. You still, after you're doing your math, you're still choosing your lowest amount. So looking at this worksheet, limiting reagent worksheet number 1, number 1, you've got the chemical equation. That is not balanced. 2 is already balanced, but 1 and 3 on worksheet 1 are not balanced. But nonetheless, 1A, if you start with 14.8 grams of C3H8 and 3.44 grams of O2, how many grams of CO2 are produced? What you're going to do is take your 14.8 grams of C3H8 and go to grams of CO2. Do your stoichiometry, go to grams of CO2. In a separate stoichiometry problem, you're going to take your 3.44 grams of O2 and go to grams of CO2. Now, that's going to give you 2 answers because it's a 2-for-1 problem. You're going to get 2 answers. What you're going to do is choose the lowest answer. That's how much CO2 can actually be produced. And again, some questions, especially on the back, is what is the maximum amount of CO2 produced? It's still the lowest answer, right? Because just like the chocolate chip cookie recipe and example, the maximum amount of cookies with a 5-pound bag of flour, a 5-pound bag of sugar, and the chocolate chips, the maximum amount of cookies, the maximum number of batches of cookies would only be one, right? Because we run out of chocolate chips. The same thing with this. This first problem could have asked, if you start with 14.8 grams of C3H8 and 3.44 grams of O2, what is the maximum amount of CO2 produced? That doesn't change your answer. You're still going to choose the lowest answer. Now, just like the packet, the limiting reagent is the given that you started with. That's the limiting reactant. So I'll just go ahead and tell you the O2 is going to be your limiting reactant. So 1B is O2. Now, going back to some vocab from your packet. Remember that the lowest amount in your stoichiometry is your theoretical yield. Okay? That's what you would use in your percent yield equation. Now, part C is not a double problem. Once you find the limiting reactant for, in this case of 1A, CO2, that limiting reactant is going to be limiting for both products. So what you're going to do, I already told you that O2 in this case is going to be your limiting. You're going to take your given for O2 and go to grams of H2O. You can ignore the C3H8. Now, another vocab term, the other reactant that is not the limiting is called the excess reagent, excess reactant. How you can tell what the excess reactant is that it gives you the highest number of your product, highest number of grams of your product. And I think that is everything for the video.